Right around 6 o'clock Eastern last night, as we were going off the air from PFTPM, here came a statement from the New York Giants after a couple of days of silence / perfunctory predictable commentary. A lengthy statement from the Giants, which says, among other things, the allegation that the Giants' decision had been made to hire Brian Daboll prior to Friday evening, January 28, is false. And to base that allegation on a text exchange with Bill Belichick, in which he ultimately states that he thinks Brian Daboll would get the job, is irresponsible. The text exchange occurred the day before Coach Daboll's in-person interview even took place. Giants ownership would never hire a head coach based on only a 20-minute Zoom interview, which is all that Mr. Daboll had at that point. In addition, Mr. Belichick does not speak for and has no affiliation with the Giants. Mr. Belichick's text exchange provides no insight into what actually transpired during our head coaching search. That's just some of what the Giants had to say. They called the allegations made by Brian Flores disturbing and simply false. I think this is part of what has been a concerted and probably coordinated effort, Peter, to push back aggressively in the court of public opinion, to not let the Brian Flores lawsuit and his extended media tour. I think he was on every network and cable news channel in one day. He had to have been wiped out on Wednesday night. He was everywhere. And I think that contributed to the effort into Wednesday night and Thursday to push back. But the battle has been joined publicly, and it is a sign that when it's time to take the gloves off in court and work this case, it's going to be contentious, it's going to be nasty, and it's going to be ugly, Peter.
You know, obviously, Brian Flores' response, I'm sure, to all this was, I was with Bill Belichick for whatever it was, 14 years, and I grew to trust Bill Belichick. We became competitors. I still trusted Bill Belichick. And when he tells me, based on his knowledge, his sources in the league, that Brian Daboll is the coach of the New York Giants, I believe Bill Belichick. And it isn't, I think it comes down absolutely to that. And then, obviously, what Belichick said came true. So that is what he is going to decide. Now, as for what the Giants said, it was very clear from the start that they were going to do many interviews and, for their GM and their coach job. And they were, at the end of that interview process, going to decide who they were going to name. My gut feeling, and it's only a gut feeling, is that the Giants entered into all of their interview requests in good faith. And look, John Mara and Steve Tisch, I'm sure, had feelings that they wanted their general manager to get his guy, but they also were going to go through this process. And because Brian Daboll went first, isn't it theoretically possible that Brian Daboll could have done such a good job in the interview that Joe Schoen privately told friends, Daboll killed it in the interview? I really think he's going to be our guy. We'll see, but I think he's going to be our guy. And again, we don't know what happened, Mike. We just don't know. We have a set of text messages from Bill Belichick. We have the New York Giants pushing back on this strongly, as you knew that they would. And I just think now we're going to need to dig very deep into this story. You made this point on Wednesday, and the more I thought about it, the more you're absolutely correct. There's a good chance that we're never going to find out the absolute truth about what happened in any of these cases, because the NFL will want to do this as they have written in every coach's contract, that any disputes are handled through the arbitration process. And in the arbitration process, when, the arbitrator, the ultimate authority is Roger Goodell, you're never going to have these things see the light of day. So the victory for Brian Flores, the partial victory at least, will be if these are heard in a court of law. And none of these teams are going to want to hear this in a court of, are going to want to have this aired out in a court of law, I don't think. But that is going to be the key thing. Are we going to be able to get Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, John Mara, Steve Tisch, Bill Belichick, Brian Flores on a stand in a public courtroom. Then and only then, in my opinion, are we going to be able to decide with any finality who's right and who's wrong in this case.
And before that, each of those individuals would be grilled in a deposition where you're in a conference room, you're videotaped, you're asked a bunch of questions. And trust me, we're on to Cincinnati is not going to get you past a question you don't want to answer. That, in and of itself, I'll tell you what, I don't know how big of a check I would write. I would write a pretty big check to be in the room when Bill Belichick is questioned under oath in a deposition where it's a lot looser. You don't have to worry about how the jury's going to react to the question. You can be hostile, you can be aggressive, you can bounce around with different styles, you can try out different theories and see if it works on the witness. And Bill Belichick's habit of just not wanting to talk about things, so repeating, we're on to Cincinnati, or it's already been addressed. If you say it's already been addressed in a setting like that, you're going to get the question again. And you're going to get it again, and you're going to get it again. And what ultimately happens is they pull out a phone, one of those fancy conference phones, and they punch in the judge's phone number. They get his receptionist, connects to the judge, and the lawyer says to the judge, we need an emergency ruling here because Mr. Belichick won't answer the damn question. So, again, I'd write a big check to be in the room for that. Now, Peter, here's part of the problem. And we've all heard about the Miranda warnings. Anything you say can and will be used against you. That's true in all litigation. Any statements made by the parties to the case can and will be used against them. That's why, look, if the NFL is smart, and I think on this point they're smart enough to realize they should get a transcript of everything and have a video ready of everything Brian Flores said in every interview that he did. Because all of that can be used as evidence. If he ever says anything that contradicts anything he said on CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, every possible network, anything that can be characterized as any type of inconsistency can be used against him. So I say that because I'm looking at this Giants statement, and I'm always looking for, first day of law school, one of the professors said the most important thing I can give you is a crap filter because there's a lot of crap out there. You need to learn how to filter it. Consider this potential chunk that would get caught in the crap filter. Sorry, enjoy your breakfast. Here's the Giants ownership would never hire a head coach based only on a 20-minute Zoom interview. Well, they weren't hiring Brian Daboll based on a 20-minute Zoom interview. If they already decided that Daboll was their guy, it was because they'd already decided Joe Schoen is their guy, and Schoen has worked with Daboll. Schoen brings more to the table than a 20-minute Zoom interview with Brian Daboll. When Schoen gets the job, and Peter, we know how this works. GM shows up first day of work as a GM, the job to which the GM has been aspiring his entire professional career. And in addition to scouting players, he's been scouting coaches. He's got a list that he's got always ready. Here are the coaches that I will hire. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's my list. If I'm Brian Flores' lawyer, I want to know what Joe Schoen's list was when he walked through the doors. Brian Daboll, your number one guy, because I got a feeling he was. So to try to create this notion, well, we would never hire someone based on a 20-minute interview. No, but you hired a GM that already planned to hire Brian Daboll. That's how it works. That's how Bill Belichick knew. Because Schoen was ready to hire Brian Daboll the minute he got the job. I think that's the theory, the factual theory that Brian Flores' lawyers will explore aggressively, and Flores will point them in that direction.
You are assuming something that you're jumping to a conclusion that I don't necessarily agree with. You say that Schoen was going to hire Daboll all along, or that was his guy all along. It's one thing to think that a guy is going to be your head coach all along. And if I ever get a shot, absolutely unequivocally, I'm going to hire this guy. But I believe that John Mara and Steve Tisch, Giants ownership, basically said, listen, if you get this job, we're going through a coaching search. And you obviously are going to have a huge say in it. And most likely, who knows what was said? I don't know what was said, but John Mara clearly had to say to him that the final decision is either going to be yours or your voice will weigh heaviest, whatever it is, because the Giants had gotten it so wrong with their last 3 coach hires. So I agree that that could easily be the way he was leaning. And I would agree that if you just look at a blank slate, who would you rather have as head coach? A guy coming off a stormy tenure in Miami, who had 4 offensive coordinators and 4 quarterback coaches in 3 years, and a reported stormy relationship or whatever relationship with Tua Tagovailoa, his quarterback, or would you rather have the guy who helped develop Josh Allen? I mean, it's not very much of a contest, but I do think...
Peter, I strenuously object. It's all in your characterization. Would you rather have a guy who's never been a head coach anywhere and we have no idea if he can step into the job? Or would you rather have a guy who's been a coach for 3 years with an inherently dysfunctional organization, working for an inherently dysfunctional owner who doesn't even live in the city where his team is? He won 8 out of his last 9 games despite all of the dysfunction and being stuck with this quarterback that the owner had to have who isn't very good, swept Bill Belichick and the Patriots, and had a 4-2 record against New England, and has proven in 3 years that he's capable of being a head coach, where we don't know what Brian Daboll is going to be because he's never done the job. You phrase it that way, Flores is the no-brainer.
But, Mike, let me ask you this. Who is going to coach the quarterback that you drafted 6th overall 3 years ago and you still have hope
Brian
for?
Daboll, maybe.
Who's going to coach
according
him?
to one of the
What?
Maybe Brian Daboll, according to one of the footnotes in the lawsuit, Daboll had it with Sean McDermott and possibly could have been lured to the Giants in that capacity. Wouldn't that have been something?
That would have been something. Look, I think this comes down to a bunch of perceptions. And I think that that's why I want to see this totally aired in the deposition process, in a court of law. That's why we need to see it this way so we can find out who exactly is telling the truth.
And Peter, welcome to the world that I used to inhabit, because in every single case I handled, there were issues like this. You had a list of all the different rabbit holes that you had to explore in order to do the job properly, because you never knew where that one little fact was going to be that caused everything to cascade in your favor. And you had to investigate everything and get to the bottom of everything. And there were constant he said, she said, he said, they said, we said, who said type disputes. Now, as to Belichick, what was alleged in the complaint is fairly straightforward. Belichick somehow knew. Belichick had inside information that Brian Daboll was getting the job. He intended to text Brian Daboll, congratulations. He had presumably an autofill malfunction where Brian Flores' name came up, and he texted it to him, and yada, yada, yada. Abbott and Costello routine at the end of the day. Belichick says, sorry, I messed up, but he didn't say the word messed. The Flores case, and this is another reason why I'm a firm believer in keeping your cards close to the vest until you have to reveal them. Flores revealed something in a conversation with Jay Williams on NPR's The Limits podcast. It's not just a claim that Bill Belichick had inside information. Let's listen to what Flores had to say.
I do think that there are back-channel conversations, back-channel meetings that are had that oftentimes influence decisions. And I think that's a clear example of that. Here's Bill Belichick, and, his resume speaks for itself. He has influence. I think to me that it was clear that decision was made with his influence, and that's part of the problem. And that needs to change. There needs to be a fair and equal opportunity to interview and showcase, like I said before, showcase your abilities to lead and earn one of those positions.
That's a heck of a check to write by Brian Flores, and the facts will determine whether or not the account has sufficient funds. That is a stunner, although, look, there was chatter that Belichick nudged the Giants toward Joe Judge and away from Josh McDaniels a couple of years ago.
Chatter.
Because he wanted to keep McDaniels. Well, but and maybe that'll be part of the discovery process
chatter.
too. Right. Now, in this case, it's different because neither of these guys currently are working for Belichick, but they both did. I could see that the Giants ownership, not Joe Shane, because he knows Daboll. He doesn't need Belichick's input on Daboll, but I could see ownership wanting to find out from Belichick, what about Daboll, what about Flores, and maybe even through the process of providing his input, that may be how he found out. Regardless of whether he influenced the decision, maybe he became aware after communicating with John Mara and or Steve Tisch that they're leaning Daboll, they're going Daboll. These are all things, though. Listen, I think it's safe to say Brian Flores won't be working for Bill Belichick again anytime in the future. Belichick is going to get grilled like he has never been grilled before, Peter.
Mike, I want to ask you one question about the soundbite we just heard from Flores. When he refers to back channel, I mean, I wish that had been more well-defined. And if I were asking the question, I would have said, do you believe that Bill Belichick and John Mara had a conversation before he sent you those texts? That is what the question is. You know, because to me, and I don't know this, it sounds like that's what Brian Flores is saying right there. And so that's what I would wonder about this whole story. You know, does Brian Flores think that Bill Belichick was talking to John Mara about this job, like the way he might have been talking to John Mara in 2020 about Joe Judge? So those are the questions that I think those need a public airing.
And here's how it'll work. Let me make it as simple as I can. And Peter, this is a compliment, not an insult. You would have been a very good lawyer because you have a natural curiosity, and you need to come to these situations with the natural curiosity, and you combine the curiosity with the tools available to you to get to the truth. So if this stays in court, not a kangaroo court presided over by Roger Goodell, which would have limited discovery rights, limited depositions, limited everything, and why waste your time? It's just a matter of weeks, hours, minutes before the rubber stamp gets applied to anything and everything that the teams are saying. That's how it works if it goes that route. But if it goes to court, at some point after the initial skirmishes, there will be a discovery process, and there are tools available to the lawyers to get their information. We've mentioned the depositions. That's where you sit down and you ask question after question after question to try to get to the bottom of issues like the one Peter raised. An important issue. What was the extent of the communications and conversations between Bill Belichick and John Mara before the text messages were sent by Belichick to Brian Flores? Before you even get there, though, here's what happens. You sit down at your computer and you brainstorm all of the documents that you want to see. And what you want to see is very simple. Among all of the other things, and it'll be a list of probably 100 or more categories of things that Brian Flores' lawyers will want to see, and there'll be fights over what's permissible and what's not, and they'll want to send in a computer expert to make sure they've gotten everything. You want to see the logs of the phone calls from John Mara's cell to Bill Belichick. You want to see the Belichick communications to Mara or anyone else with the Giants. It's going to be a very broad request that is aimed at getting to that very narrow question you've raised. When did Belichick talk to Mara? First, you got to prove it happened. Once you know it happened, then you delve into what was said, what the vibe was, everything that would go into answering your question of whether or not there was the opportunity and the ultimate influence exercised by Belichick over the process. Or, cause why else is John Mara calling Bill Belichick? Why is he doing it? Why do you do it alone without Joe Shane on the line? There's a lot of ways it can be painted and characterized, but that's exactly how it would play out.
Yeah, and I think those are the kind of things that if we could see those, if we could know those, that's going to go a long way to determining who's right and who's wrong in this, as far as the Giants section of this case would be. But, Mike, that is going to be that'd be a great day in court. I'm just telling you, the best day in court possible would be Stephen Ross. I mean, because that part of the story is probably going to determine, if it goes south, that part of the story will determine whether Stephen Ross can retain his ownership of the Miami Dolphins. So there's so much about this case that is hugely interesting. And I kind of wish it happened in a dead week, 2 weeks after the Super Bowl. But it's happening where, I mean, this is the only thing that can knock Tom Brady retiring off the the back pages or whatever, the headlines. But as far as the Giants go, I just look at this and say, we need to see a lot more and we need to know a lot more, because right now you have an adamant side on one side and you have an uber adamant side on the other side. So we'll see.
It's how it always goes, and it will be hanging around for a while. It's going to be a gift that keeps on giving. And look, St. Louis ultimately walked away with $790 million because the league realized we can't have a parade of owners going onto a witness stand getting destroyed and decimated because people like that are the worst possible witnesses. They don't want to submit to the authority of the judge. They don't want to submit to the authority of this punk that's asking me these questions. Who does this person think he or she is? It has the potential. Every time someone like that takes a witness stand, it has the potential to go exactly like the cross-examination of Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. Exactly like that. That's why St. Louis got $790 million, and frankly, they could have gotten more if they would have pushed it closer and closer to the day when all of those owners would have had to go to court and answer those questions.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.